Greetings. I'd like to welcome everyone here in Detroit to this meeting with the Socialist Equality Party presidential candidate Jerry White and vice presidential candidate Niles Niemuth. My name is Joseph Kishore. I'm the National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party. In addition to the people in this room, we are also streaming this meeting live online on both Facebook and YouTube. And we'll give the opportunity for our listeners on Facebook to comment and ask questions to the candidates. And you can do that by commenting on the stream at facebook.com/SEPUS. Facebook.com/SEPUS. You leave a comment or a question there in the below the stream, and I'll be sure to raise it with Jerry and Niles. First, I'd like to welcome Jerry and Niles.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
We're going to speak today about the state of the U.S. election campaign. And I'd just like to make a few comments to introduce the discussion. It is an extraordinary election, certainly, and an expression of a very deep and profound political crisis in the United States. We're now less than 2 months until the election, and it's a contest between two right-wing, pro-militarist representatives of the ruling class who are broadly hated. The two most, in fact, unpopular candidates, leading candidates of the major parties anyway, in modern U.S. history. And as the election goes on, they become less and less popular. Polls are showing that the race between Clinton and Trump is tightening. Clinton has seen her 8-point lead diminished to 2 points in a recent national poll, a lead that in fact evaporates completely when the Libertarian and Green candidates are included. And one of the main reasons that the race is tightening is not a growth of support for Trump, but in fact a decline in support for Clinton. And she's broadly despised, and particularly among young people, those who supported Sanders. And it's leading, I think, to some concerns within the Democratic Party over the outcome of these elections. Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were deployed to Ohio today in the effort to drum up support for Clinton and provide something of a left face for this right-wing candidate of Wall Street and the military intelligence apparatus. But I think it is certainly an expression of the diseased and decrepit state of so-called American democracy, that in an election which, in fact, was dominated in the earlier stages by very broad social anger, which found expression particularly in the campaign of Sanders. Now, the outcome of this election is these two candidates, a fascistic candidate for the Republican Party, the billionaire Donald Trump, and on the part of Clinton, the candidate of the status quo of Wall Street, of the military intelligence apparatus. And indeed, whatever happens in November, we don't have to wait until November 8th to know the character of the policy of the administration, which is going to come out of it and out of these elections. It will be a right-wing government of war, of austerity, of attacks on democratic rights. I just also wanted to make the point that we and refer our listeners, and particularly those also here in this room, to the conference that we've called in Detroit on November 5th, which we announced this week on the World Socialist website in a perspective. The headline of the conference is Socialism versus Capitalism and War. At the center of that conference, as in the campaign and the work of the Socialist Equality Party as a whole and the election campaign of Jerry and Niles, is the fight against war. And one of the, I think, the most extraordinary elements of the election campaign so far is that even though war in some way overhangs the entire election and the entire political system in the United States, the growing expansion of war, not just the danger of war, but the reality of war, the expanding war in the Middle East, in Iraq and Syria, the growing tensions which are fueled above all by the provocative actions of the United States in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in the South China Sea, the threats against China, the threats against Russia, the militarization of Eastern Europe. You have increasingly provocative and militarist statements directed at Putin. And of course, while there's no discussion of the implications, the Clinton administration has made anti-Russian and anti-Putin hysteria. It's placed it at the center of her campaign. It's criticized Trump from the right as an agent of Putin. But no one is really discussing the extreme gravity of the world situation, the implications of a war with China and Russia. What would the consequences be? These are both nuclear-armed powers, and such a war could develop very, very quickly, given whether it's planned or whether there's some incident. One could list innumerable incidents that could happen that could spark a much broader conflict. And really, the situation is extremely dangerous, and it is quite extraordinary, given the extent of military planning, particularly by the United States, but also other imperialist powers, how little this is being discussed in the elections and in the media. But we will be holding this conference, and one of the central aims of our election campaign has to sound the alarm about the danger of war. We said in the perspective that was published earlier this week that the greatest danger facing the international working class is that decisions with potentially catastrophic consequences are being made entirely behind their backs, with the extent of war preparations far exceeding the level of popular consciousness. And of course, we in this election campaign are fighting to raise that consciousness and to warn the working class in the United States and internationally about what is being planned and the implications of it, and to build a movement against war. And that's the purpose of the conference that we are calling in Detroit, and it's very much centered, or it's very much at the center of our election campaign. So with that, I would like to, first of all, introduce Jerry White, who will speak about the meetings that he's had. Both Jerry and Niles have been traveling, Jerry to Chicago, Wisconsin, and Minneapolis. Niles just got back today from a trip to West Virginia and Kentucky, and they'll be talking about the issues that they've been raising with workers and youth in these meetings, the issues they've been raising in the campaign as a whole, and the experiences of the election campaign so far. So I'd like to introduce Jerry. Just before you begin, I just want to remind those who are listening online that you can comment and ask questions by commenting on the Facebook stream, facebook.com/SEPUS. And if you write a comment there, I will raise it with the candidates during the course of the meeting. So with that, Jerry, would you like to begin?
Well, as Joe just indicated, the last little over a week, Niles and myself have begun in earnest the last 8 weeks of the campaign of a speaking tour that is going to take us throughout the country. And I think the experiences that, and Niles will speak on his experiences in Kentucky and West Virginia, but the experiences that our campaign passed through this last week, which began with the very successful meeting in the University of Illinois in Chicago, then work in the Racine and Milwaukee area of Wisconsin, then on to Minneapolis, and then yesterday at a third-party debate in Flint, Michigan. It very much confirms the points Joe is raising. First of all, a mass disaffection with the so-called choices in this election, whether it's South Milwaukee Caterpillar worker who just remarked that when the government is completely oblivious to the concerns of masses of people, then things like what happened in France in the 18th century can happen all over again. Or Minneapolis nurses who are on strike now in their second week, who surrounded the campaign team, had an intense discussion on the lack of any choices, the complete domination of the political system by a financial oligarchy. Certainly, these are candidates. I think their recent polls also indicated that many of those are even identify themselves as Clinton or Trump voters, are doing so because they fear and hate the other candidates so much. And of course, regardless of who wins these elections, they're going to be, right from the beginning, really considered as lacking any popular mandate. And of course, the policies that they will pursue, as Joe said, we don't have to wait until inaugural day in 2017 to see what they will pursue. They are both committed to escalating the wars, which have been and continue to be deeply unpopular, and to continue the attack on democratic rights, and continue the attack on the living standards of workers. So from the very beginning, regardless of who wins these elections, we certainly can anticipate a deepening political crisis and deepening social opposition. The other side of it, I think, is correct. While certainly one of the factors that has radicalized particularly young people, but large sections of the working class, is of course, just this last week was the 15th anniversary of the beginning of the war on terror. And there is a deep disquiet over these wars, the impact on American society, the returning veterans with PTSD, the fact that nothing has been resolved, just one destroyed society after another in the Middle East. And then earlier this week, a very significant report was issued by Brown University, which indicated that the cost of the wars since 2001 have been approximately $5 trillion. And everywhere, whether you're in Flint, Michigan, where people are told there's no money to replace the lead pipes, or in Chicago, where there's schools being closed one after another, there's a deep sense that society, or that the governments, both parties, have been squandering trillions of dollars and neglecting the most basic necessities of life. But I would say there's not a clear understanding of how advanced the war preparations are. People sort of sense things are happening in Syria. They sense things are happening perhaps in the South China Sea, but to really know how advanced these preparations for war are is not in the popular consciousness. So I think the question of our campaign, of course, the meetings we've held, much of our focus has been to explain precisely and to warn the working class and youth precisely how far these preparations for war have gone. I cited, for example, there was an article several months ago in the Telegraph of the United Kingdom entitled, "Here's How World War III Could Start Tomorrow." It was one of the slides we presented. As in the past, it is perfectly possible that a third world war could start with a small event or even by accident. Indeed, the skies over Syria are starting to get dangerously crowded, with Russian jets flying near U.S. planes on bombing runs and sparring with NATO air defenses in neighboring Turkey. Perhaps it could happen at sea, when a Japanese or American ship scrapes paint with its Chinese Navy counterpart amid the reefs in the Pacific that are being militarized as part of Asia's current arms race. And, as Joe indicated, these war preparations are being carried out behind the backs of the American people, behind the backs of the people of the world, and it's been a central theme of our campaign, of our public meetings, to raise the alarm and to connect the drive towards war with the growth of social inequality, the attack on democratic rights, and explain that the impulse to the dangers of World War III, the crisis of the capitalist system, the competing nation states, the struggle for markets and raw materials and access to cheap labor. The crisis of this system is also the stimulus for the emergence of massive social opposition, which our campaign is seeking to provide leadership to.
Thanks, Jerry. I just wanted to make a couple points in response to that. First of all, just on the spending, the $5 trillion was just on the war, the supplemental spending for the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya. It doesn't include, I think it's $6.8 trillion in the regular defense
the base
budget.
Yeah, right.
And that by itself underestimates, to some extent,
Right.
military spending by the United States. I mean, an extraordinary amount of money. It's not an insignificant factor in the endless assault on the working class that it has to be, that they have to continuously sacrifice to pay for just a massive deployment of resources in the U.S. Military for world conquest. I just wanted to quote one other passage. You referred to the Telegraph, was it? This is from Le Monde Diplomatique. There was an article by Michael Clare, who's written a number of books on resource wars and the sort of interest behind geopolitics. And he notes the following. He says, "But though talk of terrorism fills the news media and the political space, it is secondary in the conversations of generals, admirals, and defense ministers. It's not low-level conflict that commands their attention, but rather what they call big wars, large-scale, high-level conflict with great power adversaries like Russia and China. Such major conflicts, long considered most unlikely, are now deemed plausible by Western military strategists who claim that urgent steps are needed to deter and, if necessary, prevail in such engagements." Clinton, in her speech at the American Legion, said that one of her first acts as president was going to be to carry out a nuclear posture review in order to make sure that America's arsenal was ready, is the words that she put it. I mean, this is not, though, being discussed. I mean, what are the implications of this policy? And it's not being discussed. It's really quite strange at all in the media and sort of official politics. It's all behind the scenes, but it's a conspiracy of silence over these preparations. It's 15 years since the beginning of the War on Terror, which of course was followed by the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And there was mass opposition in 2003 to the Iraq War, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. There is deep opposition to war. And of course, I think that's one of the factors. They don't want to speak about
precisely.
it. The ruling class wants to keep these plans to the extent it can out of the political process, and they're really trying to hold this off until after the elections. Perhaps you could speak, both Jerry and Niles, about some of the issues that came up in your recent meetings. How have people reacted? What are some of the pressing political questions that have arisen in the course of your campaigns and in your meetings?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, as Joe noted, I just returned from a campaign in Kentucky and West Virginia. I was at Morehead University and Marshall University. The general response, I would say, from probably 9 out of 10 or maybe 10 out of 10 of the people we spoke to, and we spoke to many, many students, was disgust, just a general disgust with the entire election, with the choice that they're being given between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. To ask someone, what do you think about the elections, and the response would be a sigh. Some people would say, well, I don't have any words, or I don't want to talk about that. But then you would press the issue, and people have a lot to say about it, and they have a lot that they think about it. They're very upset, especially young people. A lot of them told us that they voted for Sanders, I would ask them, well, what do you think about Clinton endorsing, or Sanders endorsing Clinton, who's the favored candidate of the billionaire class? Supposedly, Sanders was fighting against the billionaire class. He was fighting for a political revolution against them, and now he's supporting their candidate. Most people would say, yeah, I'm really disappointed in that, and I really have no intention of voting for Hillary Clinton. I think obviously the question of war we raised right away with students, but there is a real lack of awareness of the danger and of what's going on right now with the plans for war against Russia, the military buildup in Eastern Europe, the plans for war with China, the military buildup in the South China Sea. These are things that students really aren't aware of and aren't being made aware of either by the media or by Trump or Clinton. I think when we would raise this figure of the trillions of dollars wasted over the last 15 years on these wars, people were, I think people were shocked to hear that much money has been spent, and two, really sort of angered by it. I think there were two interesting encounters that I had. There was at Marshall University in West Virginia, I encountered a Japanese student, and I asked him what he thought about the preparations for war in that country and how the Japanese government is reinterpreting the Constitution so that they can go to war against China. And he immediately said, "I'm totally against it. I think it's totally wrong. This is our Constitution. We're supposed to be a country that's based on peace and not on militarism, and we need to oppose it." And I thought that was very interesting. And I also encountered a young soldier, U.S. veteran, he apparently just returned from Iraq. He was one of the 6,000 official troops that are still fighting in Iraq. He was probably 3 to 4 years old in 2001. He was only 5 years old when the war in Iraq started in 2003. I asked him, well, why were you over there? What were you fighting for? And his response, which I thought was very interesting, he said, "I was over there for nothing." And I pressed him on it. I said, well, it wasn't for nothing. It was for oil and resources. And he said, "Yeah, you're right. I know that's what it was for." We saw a lot of veterans. There were a lot of people on these campuses walking around in military fatigues. And it's clear that the war has had a major impact on universities, on young people. Places like West Virginia and Kentucky are amongst the poorest places in the country. And a lot of young people have no options other than going into the military if they want to go to school, if they want to get a decent job. These areas have been heavily deindustrialized. They're rife with poverty. And so you really see that people are going into the military just to survive. And then they get sent to Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever it is the U.S. government sends them, and it really it has a horrible effect on people. So I think were just some of my experiences this week. I don't know if, Jerry, you want to say more about your experience?
I'm familiar also. We made a previous trip to West Virginia, the coal mining region, and of course these are areas which a disproportionate number of youth are in the military. They're economic conscripts. They're drawn from areas which have been shut down of mines, deindustrialized. And our campaign team noticed that every small little bridge we crossed over was the name of some dead soldier. This is how they honor them after they're killed in these wars. And it's interesting because there's, among broad layers of the working class, an immense disaffection from the whole political system. It's interesting, the front page of the New York Times has an article today how the Clinton camp is very concerned about how it's going to try to make an appeal in the so-called Rust Belt states among those who are disaffected. In other words, who look at Clinton with contempt that she deserves. Of course, what was it, just a couple of weeks ago, the remarks that she made before her hedge fund billionaire friends when she referred to those who were voting for Trump as a basket of deplorables. I mean, this indicates, the real contempt that the Democratic Party has for masses of workers and again, of course, Mr. Obama says America is pretty darn great, but it isn't pretty darn great in Flint, Michigan, in West Virginia, in Cleveland, in Minneapolis, all over. And insofar as Trump gets any support whatsoever, it's precisely because she is the sort of the prime example of the political status quo, a warmonger and a Wall Street backer her entire political career. But it was quite interesting in the issues that came up, I think, are in our meetings, and these are, of course, very unique meetings. They're the only places where a serious political discussion can be held on the issue of war, on the issue of the decay of American democracy. How is it possible that in a country of over 300 million people with the most diverse, opinions and so on, you're stuck with two such candidates, who are despised by the population? And in these discussions, we made an analysis of American society, a society which has been in deep economic decline for decades, which has resorted to military violence to try to offset its economic decline, and has been at war really not just since 2001, but essentially unending wars for a quarter of a century. And the political issues that arose, I think, are very significant because the Sanders campaign was an effort, as the World Socialist website and the Socialist Equality Party explained from the very beginning, to try to corral a deep political radicalization, an anti-capitalist sentiment that's growing all over this country and all over the world. In the aftermath of the 2008 crash, the endless bailout of Wall Street, it's true, the cost of war, of course, is $5 billion plus another, it's $5 trillion rather, and plus another $6 trillion with the basic defense budget. Well, the bailout of Wall Street is, I think they figure $14.4 trillion. It's about the same. So there's among masses of people, Sanders made his pitch as the opponent of the billionaire class. He called himself a democratic socialist. He was talking about a political revolution. And he tapped into a radicalization of workers and young people. And of course, in the end, he channeled this behind Clinton in the hopes to really smother that opposition. But that opposition hasn't gone away because it's been provoked by deep economic decline, as I said, the endless wars, and in particular, a generation of young people who are becoming politicized. I just wanted to make one remark. We had the experience of our campaign team went to, as soon as we landed in Minneapolis, we went off to the strike of some 5,000 nurses in Minneapolis and Twin Cities area. It's very in a critical strike. Alena Health is a huge hospital chain, and it is seeking to impose deep out-of-pocket costs on nurses for health care. And behind Alena stands very big banks like U.S. Bank, which entangled this hospital chain into various financial schemes, and they're trying to extract from the nurses essentially to pay off the banks. And there was a deep anger. There was a sentiment that the nurses had to fight. And as I said, when we went to the picket lines, there was a intense discussion. And this is an interesting situation because the nurses union, the Minnesota Nurses Association, and its national union, the National Nurses United, sensed that there was so much hatred for Clinton that they endorsed Bernie Sanders in order to present themselves as a sort of left union and so forth. And the unions are engaged in a miserable betrayal of the nurses, isolating their strike. A big issue is that Obamacare has been utilized to squeeze even more work out of the healthcare workforce. But we went there, we had intense discussions, and then the day after our campaign team arrived in Minneapolis, Bernie Sanders shot off a form letter to say he was supporting the nurses. And of course, this is a completely pro forma. It does nothing to support the nurses, but it's an indication that the workers are moving to the left. They were very, they feel they were betrayed by Sanders, and they're looking for political alternatives. And there was a very, as I said, a very keen interest in the political program that we are advancing.
Well, there's one question from. There's one question online which relates somewhat to this issue. One of the people, I think, who came to the meeting in Minneapolis was asking what our approach would be to to ensuring the provision of health care to the elderly. And it gets to also the question of health care as a whole, which I know was a subject of certainly of the discussion that you had, or that we've had in our reporting with the Alina nurses. I just wanted to raise one other question for you, Jerry, just because it's something which actually I find that many of our readers will ask or comment on our web. You often see it when we speak about Sanders, which has obviously been an enormously important political experience for millions of people, not only in the United States but internationally, the Sanders campaign. It's often asked, well, we say that Sanders intended this from the beginning, as you said also when you were speaking. And of course, we wrote from the very beginning that this was going to be his role, and this was the task of the Sanders campaign. That was its purpose, to take the social anger and direct it back into the Democratic Party, which of course is precisely what has happened. But oftentimes our readers will say, well, or some of our readers will ask, well, how can you say that was the purpose from the beginning? Which I think gets to some important political issues about our approach. And the approach of the Socialist Equality Party to these political questions. So I might pose these questions to you and also to Niles, but there is also the specific issue which one of our readers is asking about how we would ensure the provision of health care to the elderly.
I mean, clearly, what did we say? Some $30 trillion has been squandered on war and bank bailouts, and that's more than enough to begin a massive provision of universal health care to supply and provide the resources that are needed. We call for a socialist program. We believe in socialized medicine as part of a scientifically planned socialist society, that profit has to be taken out of healthcare. I mean, one of the things about Sanders, the National Nurses Union is promoting Sanders, but he boasted during the debates that he played a key role in the drafting of the so-called Affordable Care Act. And of course, that was an act which was essentially drafted by the most powerful insurance firms, pharmaceutical firms, hospital chains. It absolutely corresponded to the profit interests of these giant corporations. It was pitched by Sanders and other Democratic Party promoters as a genuine social reform. But millions of people have seen that it really has been aimed at shifting costs away from the employers and the government onto the backs of ordinary working people to force them into inferior coverage. And it's hit healthcare workers in particular very hard because there actually are more insured people coming into the hospitals, but there isn't a corresponding increase in the number of doctors and nurses and other hospital and healthcare staff. So it's meant an enormous increase in their workload, which Obama said. He met with executives in 2009 and he praised what Reagan had achieved in the 80s to increase productivity, of course done through union busting, mass unemployment. And he said, well, we need the same type of increases in productivity in healthcare. Of course, also the question of the banks and their role, the hedge funds and their role in nursing homes and in the hospital care and so on. I think it's also quite clear, there has been a concern on the part of the most wealthiest segments of the population that essentially people are living too long. There was a speech that was given by Steve Miller, the former head of Delphi. This was around in the mid-2000s, and he said, well, it was all good and well when people died 5 years after they retired, but how can society keep paying for people that live for 30 years? And capitalism does not correspond with providing. It cannot provide for health for those who are no longer providing profits for the rich. It would require a fundamental transformation of society and utilizing its resources for the benefit of the population, not to enrich those at the top. I mean, just on the question of Sanders, yes, I think this has been a very important experience. Of course, many organizations, Socialist Alternative, International Socialist Organization, Jill Stein of the Greens, they all promoted Sanders with the idea that you don't actually examine that he's running as a Democrat, you don't examine his political record, that he supports Obama's wars, he has rejected out of hand any socialist measures like nationalizing the banks or industries, that he promotes economic nationalism, just like a Donald Trump coming up to Flint and telling the people of Flint that the crisis in that city is caused by unfair trade and sending jobs to Mexico, not capitalism. So, of course, we have been around the block. We've seen these political figures, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, or the Syriza parties in Greece. We understand and have characterized these forces as pseudo-left, utilizing left-sounding politics only to keep the working class within the confines of the capitalist system, within capitalist politics. And in the end, they always impose austerity and the war policies of their own ruling class.
Joe, you're muted.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. I just like to bring the discussion back to the issue of war. And there was a question online from one of the listeners. He says, please discuss the absurd anti-Russian propaganda the Clinton campaign, facilitated by the New York Times and the Washington Post, has been employing ever since the WikiLeaks revelations of the inner workings of the DNC. And it's certainly a critical issue, and has been the framework of the Clinton campaign over the course of the past several months. In particular, this continual, relentless anti-Russian propaganda. Niles, you want to answer that question?
Sure. Well, it's very clear to us that this propaganda campaign it's part of the efforts to prepare for war with Russia. It is noticeable to us, and I think many others, especially in a paper like the New York Times. There's almost every day a very clear propaganda article against Russia, seeking to tie Julian Assange and WikiLeaks or Edward Snowden to Russia and to Putin. There was this major piece in September 1st in the New York Times, how moves by Assange help Russia, because Assange is revealing details about the crimes of American imperialism. So anybody who reveals anything about what the United States is actually doing in the Middle East or its war preparations, or if, say, they reveal the character of the DNC and they're behind the scenes dealings, somehow they become a stooge of Putin. I think it's very clear that the Clinton campaign has major plans for escalating the wars in the Middle East, which could possibly bring the United States into conflict with Russia, and also for escalating the turn against Russia in Eastern Europe, and the possibility of all-out war. And I think that this propaganda campaign is all about making the elections supposedly to be a mandate for war with Russia. Of course, as we've noted, the U.S. government and the Clinton campaign have yet to provide any evidence behind their claims that Russia is behind any of the hackings or is supporting Julian Assange in any way. It is remarkable that as right-wing as Donald Trump is, that Clinton has managed to critique him from the right by saying that he's not hard enough on Russia, that he doesn't want to assassinate Putin, and this means that he's weak. And Clinton will be the strong war candidate, and Trump can't be trusted. So I think that's really what's behind it, and I think we seek to expose that, and it really is part of the effort to fight against the drive to war, is to expose why this is being done. I mean, you think about, Saddam Hussein was presented as the new Hitler in 1991 and 2003. When the United States wanted to go to war, there was a whole propaganda campaign that was begun and initiated. He's the worst possible person ever. Something has to be done, and that was part of their campaign to go to war. And of course, we see what happened in Iraq. So it would be on a much larger scale with Russia. So there is a real danger.
Well, it's also, I've been involved in politics for several decades, and those of my generation and those before mine certainly remember the anti-communism that was promoted by the trade unions, by the official media. And go back to Russia was something you often heard if you were criticizing, the policy of the Vietnam War or any other policy. And here you have, in a real sort of McCarthyite campaign. I mean, that article that Niles mentioned with Assange in the New York Times, it has an ominous picture of Assange in a red hue. It's not very subtle, and he's an agent of Putin, and it gives you an idea of how a Clinton administration with the full backing of the media, with the full backing. Look, who's on her side? Paul Wolfowitz is given his backing to her, the major figures in the CIA, Robert Kagan, and they say she's much more dependable to carry out an aggressive escalation against Russia and, of course, against China. And they're going to try to, intimidate and silence any political dissent. If you dare oppose war, you're really Putin's agent, and they have on top of this all the various pseudo-left groups, the International Socialist Organization and others who denounce so-called Russian imperialism or Chinese imperialism. And then when you present a map to young people in a meeting and you see that, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the borders of NATO have moved 800 miles to the east, all through areas that used to be, Soviet or Eastern Bloc territory, right onto the, after the coup in Ukraine in 2014, right onto the borders of Russia. And it's clear, and we made the point that the most violent force on the planet is American imperialism. And the task of the working class is to oppose it. So insofar as Putin or the regime in China, it's the task of the Chinese and Russian working class to deal with the oligarchs and the capitalists in those countries. And their promotion of nationalism or war games, of course, does nothing to really oppose imperialism. So we're saying the working class in the United States must unite with workers internationally. And again, of course, Sanders supports the wars. He says the Democratic Party platform is the most progressive platform in history. If you actually read the platform, it says, the Democrats want to stop Russian aggression. They're going to check China, and so on. I mean, this is what Sanders has promoted.
Well, he also has in his Our Revolution page now, there's a section, actually when it was first launched, this was what he launched after he packed it in and endorsed Sanders, he launched the Our Revolution. And when it was first launched, it didn't have anything on foreign policy. And then it was added a bit later, but you read it, and it includes a reference to the need to defend the national interests of the United States, and fully endorses the whole human rights,
Right.
imperialism, and the framework. I mean, I think it is extraordinary, and it's worth emphasizing this point. I mean, outside the Socialist Equality Party, there is no party which is opposing war and is raising these dangers. I mean, it is quite extraordinary. In 2003, on the eve of the invasion of Iraq, hundreds of thousands of people marched in the streets of cities in the United States. Millions. There were 2 million people in Rome, 1 million in London. I think 500,000 in D.C.
Yeah, the New York Times referred to the two great superpowers as the United States and then as the global opposition.
Right, and world public opinion, yeah.
Right.
And where has that gone? I mean, it's not that opposition to war has gone away, and I think certainly when we speak to workers and young people, there's immense opposition to war. And even what Niles was saying about even veterans who are saying, well, it's about oil. And there is certainly a deep hostility to war, but there's no organized opposition. What happened? I mean, the organizations that were in the leadership of the anti-war protest movements directed everything behind the Democratic Party, first in 2004 and then in the 2006 elections, 2004 with the campaign of John Kerry. In 2006, the Democrats took control of Congress and then promptly endorsed the surge of the Bush administration in Iraq, and then of course 2008, and it was all channeled behind Obama, the candidate of hope and change, and he was presented by all the sort of organizations around the Democratic Party as the transformative candidate. And what happened? I mean, he continued the wars, launched drone assassinations, CIA operations, the pivot to Asia, the campaign against Russia. And now we have a situation in these elections between Clinton and Trump. On the case of Trump, a fascistic candidate who's calling for a massive increase of the military, and Clinton who's managing to criticize him from the right as being insufficiently aggressive towards Putin and Russia. But I mean, this opposition to war hasn't gone away. I mean, it still is deeply embedded. It has no conscious political expression. Really, outside of the Socialist Equality Party and the International Committee of the Fourth International, our sister organizations throughout the world, there's no political movement which is opposing the catastrophe that capitalism is leading mankind towards.
Yeah, our comrades in Germany have conducted an absolutely something that a very powerful campaign in the Berlin state elections. The elections, I believe, are next week, and as you say, we are the only ones opposing war. The comrades in the PSG have really, in the best traditions of Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, have opposed efforts to remilitarize Germany with all of the horrific experiences of the German people. And they've tapped into a very powerful current of opposition. But all of the official parties, including Die Linke, the Left Party, and so forth, support war. I think one of the issues that I raised at one of my meetings, because people said, Sanders called himself a socialist. Of course, Francois Hollande in France calls himself a socialist, and there's a long history of identifying oneself as a socialist in order to fool the masses of workers. And what is Hollande's policies? He's waging French imperialism is at it again, including in its former African colonies, and in the name of the war on terror, as our comrades in the German elections have explained, he's used so-called anti-terror laws to try to crack down on mass opposition of the working class to attacks on retirement benefits and changes in labor law.
Well, we're talking about before the sort of the latent opposition to war that we found. I think the main reason that all of these wars are planned and carried out behind the backs of the working class is because if people were asked in a genuine democratic vote, do you want to spend $10 trillion over the next 15 years, destroying country after country, the answer would be a resounding no. We're not doing that. We're going to spend $10 trillion on health care, on public education, on ensuring people the right to a job. That if we actually lived in a democratic society and people were asked, they would say, let's put that money to use in a productive manner. It's we really we saw the opposition in 2003, and I think it is vital that we fight to build a new anti-war movement that will put an end to these wars.
I think one other thing is important. I had the opportunity to hear the Green Party's candidate Jill Stein a couple of weeks ago in Detroit, and she raised issues, in fact, about war and even the danger of nuclear war. But the perspective of the Greens is that somehow, if you can reveal to the powers that be how unreasonable their policies are and how they'll be incinerated in a nuclear war as well, then reason will prevail. And war can be stopped by appealing to the powers that be. And of course, history has demonstrated the exact opposite. The capitalist system produced 2 world wars in the last century, and it's now threatening mankind with the 3rd World War. And it's only the development of an international movement of the working class that fights to put an end to capitalism, the private ownership of the means of production, the economic dictatorship by a financial oligarchy, and the division of the world into nation states, and the establishment of socialism can stop war.
Thanks, Jerry. I just would like to remind everyone who's listening that you can ask questions on the feed. We're at facebook.com/SEPUS. There is one question here, and I also want to open the floor up here in Detroit to questions to the candidates. There's one question, which I think is an important one. Andrea asks, how can we change this 2-party system to be more inclusive? Do you find social media helping your race to the White House? And the reason I say it's important, I think it offers a certain opportunity to explain the conception of our campaign and why we are running in these elections. Niles, perhaps you want to answer that, and then we'll take some questions also here from the floor.
Yeah, well, I would say that we're under no illusions that we will win the White House in this campaign. I think the main purpose of our intervening in this election cycle is really to fight to prepare the working class and young people for what's to come. What's going to happen after November 8th. As we've been discussing this whole time, I mean, there are plans for more war, there's more austerity, and we're really fighting in this campaign to mobilize people and to build a movement of the working class to fight against war and to fight against austerity. And that's the real purpose of our campaign. And of course, we're using social media to reach as many people as we can online. We're going out. We're speaking in various places. We'll be having many more meetings to come in the next several weeks. We really want, and of course, we're having this conference on November 5th. The real purpose of our campaign is to fight to build an anti-war movement of the working class, which will fight for socialism here in the United States and internationally. Of course, our campaign isn't just directed to workers and young people in the United States, it's directed to workers and young people all over the world. Jerry and I both spoke at a meeting hosted by the Socialist Equality Party in Germany, where they're intervening in the Berlin state elections. So I think that's also a very significant aspect of our campaign, is appealing to and fighting for the international unity of the working class.
Well, I mean, the questioner asked, is it possible to sort of democratize the electoral system? I mean, the ballot access laws are entirely undemocratic. The Democrats and Republicans control the entire means in which to get access to the ballot. imposing immense requirements for gathering tens of thousands of signatures in each state. And the decay of American democracy, the decay of the whole political system, is the reflection of the immense social polarization and growth of social inequality. The rise of a financial aristocracy which has absolutely an iron grip over the economy is reflected politically through a two-party system which can the aspirations of millions of people cannot find any expression through, because their aspirations, as Niles just explained, the aspirations of masses of people for peace, for equality, to rebuild infrastructure, it comes into direct conflict with the prerogatives of this oligarchy. And so they can't permit any democratic expression of the will of masses of people. Instead, the opposite is going on. By the way, the Snowden movies, hitting the theaters today, and that's what is the government? How does the government respond to dissent? It spies on the people. It militarizes the police. There was, and this of course is not just in the United States. I was really struck, and I quoted at one of the meetings a report issued by the European Union Institute for Security Studies, and they said the following: the key task of the European EU military was, quote, the protection of the rich of this world from the tensions and problems of the impoverished. As a proportion of the world population that is impoverished and frustrated continues to increase, the tensions between this world and the world of the rich will increase. And they went on to add, technology contracts the world into a small town that is on the verge of revolution. While we have to deal with an increasingly integrated upper stratum, we are at the same time confronted with the growth of explosive tensions in the poorest lower stratum. I mean, the ruling elites, they took note of the popular support for Sanders. They took note of the growth of the interest in socialism, which is a fatal, which has fatal implications for the ruling elites. And they are taking both measures for repression. That's why we don't have illusions. Of course, we're going to utilize whatever opportunities we have. We're going to be a write-in candidate status in many states. But we think that the only way this drift to ever greater authoritarian forms of rule can be stopped is the active intervention of masses of politically conscious workers that fight for a revolutionary restructuring of society and a genuine democratizing of society.
Just on that last point, one reader asked, or listener asked, will the SEP be on the ballot in all 50 states? And the answer is no, we won't be on the ballot in all 50 states. I think many people don't quite realize what it takes to get on the, and certainly internationally, what it takes to get on the ballot in American elections. As many as 50,000 signatures, 100,000 signatures more. And of course, half of those end up being thrown out in the process. Generally,
they control the ballot access, and they scrutinize every single signature. If it's missing an apartment number, or if they will exclude it.
And we've had a lot of experience with
and we've spent thousands and tens of thousands of dollars
of course,
in court fighting these things. Absolutely.
And really, what it requires is a lot of money.
Yes.
But I think it gets to the And even write-in, we've been filing the paperwork to get write-in status. In some states, you have to get 1,000 signatures just so that to get write-in status. In many states, you cannot write in. They will not count a write-in vote. It doesn't matter if you're not. And many of those states, in fact, have the worst ballot access laws. So basically, it's impossible to vote for anyone who's not been officially sanctioned by this. It's the most undemocratic process, and it corresponds to the undemocratic character of the whole political system in this country. But what we really want, we want people to vote for us, and we want people to write us in. We'll be on the ballot in Louisiana, and there may be a couple other states, and we want people to write Jerry and Niles in. But what we really want is for people to become involved in the social and join the Socialist Equality Party, join the IYSSE, build this movement. As Niles says, it's a question of what's to come after the election. There's going to be immense struggles And a political leadership has to be built. That's the key issue. In the fight against war, the fight against inequality, and the fight against capitalism. And in particular, if you agree with our program, we want you to come to the conference in Detroit on November 5th. And workers and young people all across the country are urging to attend this conference. It will be the culmination of the election campaign. It will build a political leadership against war and against capitalism and prepare for what's going to come after the election. So we really want people to attend and to become involved.
We have some questions.
We have some questions from the audience in Detroit or comments. We maybe take a couple from people here.
This is Lawrence Porter. I had the opportunity of traveling with Niles to West Virginia. And I just wanted to make a comment on especially about this question about race. The Clinton administration has made race a major issue in the election. She just issued this statement, which was caught online, saying that Trump's supporters are a basket of deplorables, and that they're sexist, racist, homophobic, et cetera, you name it. And we answer that in an article we published today, but there's no question about it that Trump is appealing to bigotry and so forth, but that's not the main reason why a lot of people are supporting Trump. We had the experience in Huntington where we gave a leaflet to a young white female worker, and she told me that she supported Trump. We pointed out to her that, in fact, Trump is part of the capitalist class, that he's for the rich. He's really no different, really, than Hillary Clinton, that both of them are out to destroy the rights of the working class, and that's how they made their money. She was very quiet. She shook her head. She said, oh, I agree, and then later brought her husband to the meeting, that we had in Huntington. The conditions in Huntington, just to have, many people may not be aware, is one of the highest levels of poverty in the country. The official poverty rate in the state is 25%. The poverty rate in Huntington alone is 41.6%, for the working class. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And what she expressed was, she said, look, maybe he's the only one that's at this point, talking about jobs, that we actually need jobs. And they felt completely abandoned by the Democratic Party or by anyone who's going to speak for their interest. And I think this is important because, the way that they're presenting this is that, that this is a racial issue, that the conditions facing black and white workers are completely different, when in fact there's really not much difference there at all. There's no difference at all. And that the biggest challenge facing the working class is uniting against all false divisions that are being created to try to keep the working class divided. We also had the experience in Huntington of running into one of the, what we call pseudo-left supporters of a political tendency. He was wearing a Black Lives Matter button, and immediately started saying, well, the Socialist Equality Party is racist. It opposes Black Lives Matter. I pointed out to him, I said, well, Black Lives Matter supports black capitalism, which he was taken aback, by the response. He said, well, you don't support black capitalism. Well, read the program. Read it over carefully. It absolutely does. And, he walked away at that point. But, I think that this issue of uniting the working class and the program that we put forward is extremely important, because everything is being done to divide the working class, and especially by the policies of the Clinton administration in appealing to to race in this form.
Just responding to what Larry had to say, West Virginia and Kentucky, these are areas that are stereotyped as being full of racist white people, conservative, backwards, and it's just not the case. Wherever we've gone, wherever we campaigned in Kentucky and West Virginia, we were very well received. There were certainly people, as Larry said, who said they supported Trump. But once you start talking to them about the issues, it becomes very clear that they're not supporting Trump because they hate Mexicans or because they hate black people. It's because of the conditions which they face, which are very real. And you have the Democratic Party, Obama and Hillary Clinton, telling everyone that things are great and that they just need to shut up. Trump is the only one who's talking about the conditions that these people face. And I think if, the going to West Virginia and going to Kentucky really shows the falsity of the claims of the pseudo-left that white workers have white privilege. If you want to, these are areas where workers, regardless of their race, are deeply impoverished. This is an area that's been hard hit by the heroin crisis, which is affecting areas in this country, all over this country, and particularly affecting white workers. The idea that these people who are living in the worst conditions, in dire poverty, are somehow privileged is really offensive. We oppose that notion, and we're really fighting to unite workers, whether they're white or black, because the conditions of poverty, of low wages, of unemployment, these are conditions that face workers regardless, if they're white or black or if they're an immigrant or, this is something that everybody faces, and particularly in West Virginia and Kentucky.
Well, the Clinton administration is trying to present, or the Clinton campaign is trying to present itself. Well, we are the spokesmen of tolerance and diversity and so forth. And of course, as I said in the opening remarks, there's no way that a billionaire demagogue could get any hearing and palm himself off as a spokesman of the disenfranchised if it were not for the relentless attack and decline in living standards overseen by the Democratic Party. West Virginia, deindustrialization in city after city, the Obama administration, the slashing of wages, wage stagnation, the collusion of the unions with the Democratic Party in these attacks. And Trump is a phenomena which you can see repeated all over the world, whether it's the National Front in France or the Alternative for Germany, everywhere in which deindustrialization, attacks on the working class, austerity have been carried out, everywhere in which the old parties that claim to speak for the working class, the socialist parties, the communist parties, had betrayed the working class, at the same time promoting economic nationalism to tell workers their enemies were workers overseas. In all of these areas, these demagogues seek to divert the immense social anger down the path of anti-Muslim, anti-Mexican, anti-immigrant chauvinism. But if you're going to pull the rug out from underneath these demagogues, you have to have a political program that unites the working class to answer this immense social crisis. And the Democratic Party is far from doing that. It has worsened it over many years. Now, the other interesting thing, of course, of which the pseudo-lefts never remark when they denounce the so-called backward white workers of Appalachia, is that in the battles of the 1920s, the Battle of Blair Mountain in the 30s, the Bloody Harlan, black, white, Polish, Italian, Irish miners united, in many cases led by socialists and left-wing minded workers, to carry out the most heroic struggles against industrial slavery. And no gains would have been made by workers without the unity of the working class. And look at the areas that we're going. I spoke yesterday in Flint. Flint in 1936-37, the auto workers who built the industrial unions, again led by socialists, seized the factories of General Motors. And you have people saying, oh, the issue in Flint is that it's institutionalized racism that caused the lead poisoning. Excuse me, half the population is white. Black and white workers face the same problems. The destruction of tens of thousands of jobs. GM used to employ 80,000 workers in Flint. It now employs about 5,000 workers in it, you know? And the Obama administration oversaw the slashing of wages. In Minneapolis, where we were, in 1934, there was a general strike led once by our movement, the Trotskyist movement, united Swedes and Poles and everything. So the question of the unity of the working class and the rejection of this argument promoted by the pseudo-left and Black Lives Matter that American society is divided by an unbridgeable gap between white America and black America. It plays directly, you know, into the efforts to divide the working class. And it articulates the interest. These people are not interested in overcoming poverty for black workers or anybody else. They're interested in using legitimate grievances over police killings, over racism, in order to advance their own aspirations into positions of corporate and political power. And a new generation of the Al Sharptons and the Jesse Jacksons. So such politics have to be rejected. Just one last point. It is an issue. It comes up on the campuses, and it was very deliberately promoted by the Clinton campaign and the media because they were very concerned that the vote for Sanders reflected the fact that people were concerned about class and the division of society along class lines. So they promote race, they promote the gender issue because they're trying to change the narrative. But the rich history of the class struggle in Milwaukee, by the way, where they promote this. This is after a black youth was murdered by the police in Seville. Smith was shot actually by a black policeman in mid-August. But all the talk about the unbridgeable black and white. This is a city where in 1854 an escaped slave was being chased down by slave catchers from the South using the Fugitive Slave Law Act. He was imprisoned, and 5,000 Wisconsinites surrounded the prison, freed him from prison, this is Joshua Glover, and ushered him off to Canada to freedom. I mean, that's the traditions in these areas, and such promotion of such racial divisions is thoroughly anti-working class.
I would just note very briefly, and then we'll take a question again from the floor here, that one of the Black Lives Matter activists who's been very prominent in the media, et cetera, is on the, you talk about positions, is on the school board of the Baltimore City Schools as a major advisor. I think he's making on the order of $150,000 a year or something like this. Of course, Baltimore is run by the mayor, you have to remind me the name of the mayor.
Stephanie Rawlings Blake.
Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who is who chaired the Democratic Party National Convention.
A black woman who denounced the black youth as thugs
in Baltimore after the killing of Freddie Gray. I mean, these are not, whatever role there is racism exists and plays within particular acts of police violence, et cetera, the actions of certain of the state. These are not fundamentally racial questions. These are class issues. We talk about police violence or poverty or anything else. These are class issues, and there's this constant effort to obscure that fundamental class divide, to divide the workers against each other, and really prevent and undermine class consciousness. Yes, we have another question here from Detroit.
Could you expand a little bit on Clinton's war record?
He asked if you could expand a little bit on Clinton's war record.
What?
He's stealing my thunder.
Go, you can.
Yeah.
Patrick Martin, who writes on U.S. politics, for the WSWS.
I just wanted to say one thing about in response to the question about the reformability of the two-party system before we deal with that. Today it was announced by the Committee on Debates that they were excluding the Libertarian Party and the Green Party from the presidential debates that are being held, the first one September 26th. So a party which is polling at 10%, which means it would receive somewhere around 12 to 15 million votes in November 8th, if that vote holds up, is to be excluded from the televised discussion of the issues in the election, as well as the Greens, who are also polling significant numbers. Of course, in any European country, a party that polled 15% or 5% of the vote would be considered a substantial political formation. It would have members in parliament. It would have recognition. It would probably have its own daily press. But in the United States, the land of freedom and democracy, you only get two voices, and those two voices sound very much alike. Now, on to Clinton's war record, I was going to raise two things that appeared in the press today. First one appears in the Washington Post, and it is the answer to the question that was just raised. The headline is, Hillary Clinton regrets her Iraq vote, but opting for intervention was a pattern. And the article traces very objectively Clinton's record on every decision to go to war or to drop bombs and fire missiles from the time her husband entered the White House in January 1993 until the time that she became Obama's Secretary of State. And it makes it very clear that early on she had drawn the conclusion that the U.S. Should seize every opportunity to use force when it could be justified as an attempt at humanitarian war. She cited, of course, Bosnia is one example. Rwanda is the example in the negative. But they interviewed a series of former advisors and officials of the Clinton administration and the Bush administration. And one of the Clinton officials is a man named Bruce Riedel, R-I-E-D-E-L. And he was the Deputy National Security Advisor in the second term of Bill Clinton. And they say the following. Riedel often discussed foreign affairs with the First Lady. Quote, the most force-averse person in the Clinton administration was the president, he said. That is, Bill Clinton. Hillary Clinton, by contrast, quote, was among those who were encouraging the president not to let Saddam Hussein off the hook this time, unquote. This is a reference to the series of attacks that Bill Clinton ordered during the year of his impeachment, 1988, 1999, when they were regularly firing cruise missiles and bombing Baghdad over alleged violations of the inspection regime. And the article is quite long. I won't quote it again, but it goes through all the way to 2005 or 2006 and makes it very clear that Clinton's vote, the theme of the article is that Clinton's vote in October 2002 to give George W. Bush the authority to go to war in Iraq was not a mistake in the sense of an aberration, a deviation from her previous line. It was, in fact, a completely in continuity, and they make the point in the article that Clinton's vote was so predictable that Edward Kennedy, who was rounding up the votes against it, did not even bother to call her because he knew she was going to vote to give Bush authority for war. It wasn't even a question. He didn't even bother to try to convince her not to support the war. Now, the second thing is I wanted to return to the question of war. It's an op-ed which will be published in the print edition of the Wall Street Journal tomorrow, but is on their website tonight. It's headlined, Sizing Up the Next Commander-in-Chief, and the author is Robert Gates, the former Secretary of Defense under Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, and at least based on his memoir, which I have read, was a great admirer and worked very closely with Hillary Clinton during the time that he was the Secretary of Defense and she was the Secretary of State, which was almost the entire first term of Obama. And he begins as follows. I would say this overall, this piece reads like he has internalized the resolution on war of the International Committee of the Fourth International with negative signs where we have plus signs and so on, but vice versa. But he says you wouldn't know it from the presidential campaigns, but the first serious crisis to face our new president most likely will be international. The list of possibilities is long, longer than it was 8 years ago. And then he goes through, and it's the same list that animates our own resolutions on war. He starts with China, the pivot to Asia, then he goes to Russia, the crisis in Eastern Europe, then he goes to Iran and the uncontrolled violence breaking out in the Middle East, and North Korea, and so he's got the whole list. Now, he's quite critical of both candidates, but, and this is very significant, this is the man who was in charge of the Pentagon, who was the head of the CIA. He had a 30-year career in the CIA. This is a man of the deep state. All right? He's been where, he knows where the bodies are buried because he put a lot of them there. All right? He speaks for the permanent military intelligence apparatus. So his last paragraph is this. At least on national security, I believe Mr. Trump is beyond repair. He is stubbornly uninformed about the world and how to lead our country and government, and temperamentally unsuited to lead our men and women in uniform. He is unqualified and unfit to be commander-in-chief. Well, that's the voice of the Pentagon. It sounds very similar to Clinton's own speeches. But he's quite critical about her, and he said in the paragraph before, this is the hurdle that he has laid, the challenge that he's laid to Clinton, to get his vote. In other words, to get the support of the military intelligence apparatus. He says, Mrs. Clinton has time before the election to address forthrightly her trustworthiness, to reassure people about her judgment, to demonstrate her willingness, listen to this, to stake out one or more positions on national security at odds with her party's conventional wisdom. In other words, to be for war when everyone is against it. And then here's the final. And to speak beyond generalities about how she would deal with China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, the Middle East, and international trade. Whether and how she addresses these issues will, I believe, affect how many people vote, including me. So there you have it on the line. He's saying, look, the next administration is going to have to be prepared to take an aggressive position on China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, the Middle East, and as he said in the first paragraph, nobody's talking about it in the election. So his assessment of the actual state of the election is very similar to what was just outlined by Comrade Joe and by our candidates. This is the great unmentionable. It's now being mentioned, and obviously it's quite significant that this appears in the leading business journal in the country, signed under the byline of the former Secretary of Defense. But, war is the issue of issues in this election, but just nobody's talking about it.
To add also Libya in 2011, which she played a decisive role in the regime change operation, which was a direct response to the Egyptian and Tunisian revolution, which overthrew American-backed dictatorships, and she played a very key role in funneling weaponry and logistics to Islamic fundamentalists who were utilized to overthrow the Gaddafi regime. Of course, she infamously said, "We came, we conquered, he died." She cackled over that, over Gaddafi's murder. And of course, she has taken the most hawkish stand on the issue of Syria, even more aggressive than Obama. She's pushing for a no-fly zone, which would mean that U.S. jets would be in a position to shoot down Russian jets which are also in Syria. And one last thing is, the twist she'll add is called the Hillary Doctrine, which means that wars will now be fought in the name of protecting women and girls.
Yeah, I think the review of Hillary Clinton's record is very important, and for understanding what is to come. War is a real danger. You know, we've written about the $1 trillion that they're investing in modernizing America's nuclear weaponry. You know, there are generals who are talking about making nuclear weapons usable. You know, these are plans that they're making. They're very real plans. And there's a real danger to hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people on this planet. You know, the last 15 years of war, the last quarter century of war, has now become the possibility of war with Russia and China. Direct confrontations between nuclear-armed powers, which could wipe out humanity. I mean, this is a very real danger, and that's one of the reasons why it's not being talked about. And I think the importance of our campaign and of raising the danger is to mobilize the working class and young people against this. I think that the conference that we're having on November 5th is going to be very important, and our supporters should make plans to attend that, because that's going to be where we plan for what is to come after the elections, and fighting against war, fighting against social inequality, and fighting for socialism.
Well, I think that's an appropriate place to end this discussion, and I want to reiterate what Niles said about attending the conference. We are building a movement against war that's international, that is based on the working class, that is opposed to all the parties of the bourgeoisie, and is opposed to the capitalist system, and based on a socialist program. And we want everyone to read our material and make plans to attend. I would also like to urge all of our listeners to make a donation to the World Socialist website or the SEP Election Fund. You can donate to the election campaign by going to sep2016.com/donate and make a very generous donation to our election campaign. As we noted, both Jerry and Niles are traveling all over the country. In addition to the meetings that we've had, they're going to dozens and dozens of cities throughout the country over the next 2 months. I'm not sure if you'll have any days when you're not on the road, or very many of them over the next couple months. And all of that takes money. We're sending out posters and leaflets and material. We're trying to get as much information out as possible to warn about war, to prepare for the struggles to come. And it all costs money. And we really want all of our listeners to make a donation as generous as you can, and make a sacrifice to support this election campaign by going to sep2016.com/donate. And you can find out more about the conference at sep2016.com/conference. So become involved, join the SEP, join the IYSSE, and take up this fight for socialism. So with that, we'll end this meeting. I want to again thank Jerry, thank Niles, thank everyone here in Detroit, and thank all of our listeners online for participating.
Thank you. Good night.